Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. We're just going to give it another minute or so for everybody to join the session, get comfortable, get that cup of tea on the go, and then we'll get straight into it. I can see a few names now entering the room, which is fantastic. Great to see you all. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I think while we wait for a few more to join, I'll just sort of set some ground rules for today's session. The session today: build your dental empire, the secrets of practices that thrive long term. What we're going to be doing in today's session is we're going to be keeping it to a tight 30 minutes. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, so do listen up, but also importantly, put your questions in the Q&A box and in the chat as we move through, as you have questions come to mind. We will try and find some time at the end of today's sessions to answer those questions live. If we don't have time, we will come back to you directly. You will get an answer. So please interact, share your thoughts, ask questions. We'll make sure that you get answers to those questions either today or in the next day or so. So look, I think there's a healthy amount of people here now. And yeah, like I said already, thank you so much for your time. Let's get straight into it. So I'm joined today by Andy Sloan, the Managing Director EMEA of Dental for Agilio Software. I won't try and do Andy's career justice by introducing him to you all. I will let him do that himself. So Andy, please sort of say hello to our audience and introduce yourself and let everybody know about your amazing experience and why you're able to talk with such authority on today's topic.
Thanks, James, and it's good to be here. So, hello everyone. I'm Andy Sloan, the MD of Dental for Agilio Software. Prior to Agilio, I was the business development director at Portman Dental Care, which led me to oversee the acquisition of more than 100 dental practices and a software business. Prior to that, I ran a practice brokerage and financial services business across 11 different countries across Europe at Henry Schein. I've been in dentistry now for 15 years. I'm an accidental dental strategist. I arrived in the industry by accident, and I've never left. So hopefully I've got some relevance to the audience today. And if you can take one or two things away from what I'm going to talk about, then I'll consider that a job well done.
I'm sure
Okay,
we're going to find one or two things. Yeah, absolutely. Go for it, Andy.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with something that kind of surprises most people. And that's if you line up 20 dental practices that all look successful from the outside. And by successful, I mean full appointment books, good Google reviews, long-standing teams in place, and you put their P&Ls next to each other. What you'll find is that 3 or 4 of them are genuinely resilient businesses, and the rest are fragile. And when I'm saying fragile, I mean financially fragile, operationally fragile, and almost always dangerously dependent on 1 or 2 people. And that's usually the principal within that practice. And that gap between looking successful and resilient is the single most important thing that we're going to talk about today. Because the practices that thrive over the next 10 years aren't going to be the ones who are the busiest. They're going to be the ones who have done all the boring work underneath.
I think that statement or that use of the word fragile, Andy, is quite provocative. It can sometimes be something that people don't want to hear, but I think also some of the best business operators are always looking for that fragility in their business and how they can make things more resilient and stronger. And so can you give us a few more examples of what fragility looks like, and how can a business owner or a practice owner or an owner of a business that has numerous practices identify fragility in their business as a starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is provocative, and I say it deliberately, because busy's the thing that lulls owners into a false sense of security. So a full diary feels like proof that the business is working, but in actual fact, it isn't. It's proof that demand is working, and they're 2 very, very different things. So when I look at a practice, I look at 4 fragilities, and I'll go through each of them, and I'll try and keep it short. So the first one is revenue fragility. So most practices live month to month on UDAs or one-off private treatments or whoever happens to walk through the door. If
Mm.
you cancel a week, lose an associate, have a bad January, and the P&L falls over, there's no ballast. The second part of it is people fragility. The principals, the product, the manager, the marketer, I say chief cook and bottle washer, the mentor and the backstop. So they're everything to everybody within that dental practice. If you take them out for a month and the place wobbles, that's not a business. That's a job with equity attached to it. And then thirdly, data fragility. So owners who are making six-figure decisions on gut feel, but they don't know the real cost per new patient, the treatment conversion rate by clinician, or the recall adherence. And if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. And then if you can't measure it or fix it, you can't sell it either. And then lastly, there's regulatory fragility. And this one is sharpening fast. So recently, the CMA launched a formal market study into private dentistry. Practices that can't evidence their pricing, consent, treatment planning at the push of a button are going to find the next 2 or 3 years really, really uncomfortable. So the question isn't how full is your diary today? The question is what happens to your practice if you, the owner, don't walk through the door for 4 weeks. If the honest answer is we'd be in trouble, you don't have a business, you've got a very expensive job.
When it slight notification going off there, Andy, but the beauty of a live broadcast.
My doorbell's just gone ice, so I completely apologize.
No problem at all. I think that's the authenticity that we get from these types of sessions, right? That's great. It to sort of come back on that ever so slightly. I think that question you asked there of if the owner was not there for 4 weeks, what would happen? How would you advise an owner to sort of carry out that thought exercise? Would you look at each one of those 4 things one by one and think about what could the impact be, or is there a better way to do that assessment?
So yeah, you need to look at them all in isolation, but understand that they are all interlinked. So looking at one of them and fixing one of them won't fix everything within the business. As an example, that fragility can still be present. So I would say that when you're looking at whether your business is fragile, the one salient point is if you're not there, does the business wobble? And that kind of answers, the main part about fragility of your business, and everything else kind of follows. And a lot of owners kind of don't want to hear if their business is fragile or not. And the reason that they don't is because the feedback loop can be slow, and a P&L can be quite forgiving. So if you take a fragile practice, it can run for years and sometimes decades on momentum alone. It will only break when something changes, and that will be like the associate leaving, the principal having a health scare, as an example, the NHS contract reforms, a corporate can open 2 streets away. And that's really when fragility becomes visible, by which point it's usually too late and definitely too expensive to fix it. So the owners that I admire most are the ones that do the work before they have to. They treat resilience as an investment and not an emergency.
And so to take one of those examples that you just shared, an associate leaving, for example, how could a owner take measures now to build that resilience should that day ever arrive, rather than finding themselves in an emergency situation? How would they tackle that type of future problem that could occur?
Yeah, so understanding the problem is the first part. So understanding whether we'll use an associate or a principal dentist, that's generating the most revenue in the business. A lot of groups, or a lot of dental practices don't even know that's the situation. And it's only when you sit down and look at the revenue that's coming into a dental practice and which of the performers are actually delivering against that total revenue, can you see if you've got a challenge or an issue or not. Addressing it is the harder thing, and that's usually quite emotive as well. There's many different ways of addressing that. There's workflows within the practice to make sure that High value treatments are distributed evenly among the associate population. There's no gaming going on within there that generates more revenue than others. So there's quite a few different ways of looking at it. But most importantly, it's understanding it first. It's making it visible within that practice, and then coming up with a plan of how you can tackle it. If an associate leaves, what happens? Do you know, if the principal dentist, like I said, goes off with a health scare, what happens? They're all things that build resilience in your practice, and not many people look at those on a day-to-day basis because they're operating on a day-to-day basis. For me, I've said it before, kind of what gets measured gets done. Measure these things early on and create plans that you can put that resilience in your practice if any of those things happen.
I think that's a really nice transition into what does resilience look like, and what can some of those measurement frameworks look like. When we were preparing for today's session, Andy, some of the things that you shared with me is really centered on, locking in recurring revenue. Where's that possible? Where can we look for those types of revenues? You also talked about systems, not heroes, right? So I definitely want to hear you talk a little bit more about that. And then I think the patient relationship and the opportunities that sit there in that resilient business model. So if you could take us a few steps further on from what you've already started to share here, Andy, that'd be great.
Yeah. And yeah, you've just encapsulated it pretty well. There's three foundations, and none of them are particularly glamorous. So we'll start with the first, which is, as you said, predictable reoccurring revenue. And by that, I mean the monthly share of, a meaningful share of the monthly income that arrives whether a patient books or not this week. For most practices, that's membership plans. And a well-run practice shifts the business model in three ways. A well-run membership plan shifts the business model in three ways. It can smooth cash flow. That's the first thing. It dramatically increases patient lifetime value. Plan patients are, they attend the practice more regularly, and it's proven they accept more treatment, and they also refer more as well. And critically increases the valuation of a practice if you ever come to sell. So acquirers pay a very different multiple for reoccurring revenue than they do for one-off revenue. And I've seen this firsthand. I've seen us walk away from deals or reprice them significantly downward where the recurring base was weaker than we thought it was. And there's a benchmark that I use. If less than 20% of your monthly revenue is genuinely reoccurring, you're a fragile business. If you can get that above 35%, you're in a different conversation entirely. Because predictable revenue isn't just good cash flow, it's the single biggest multiplier on which your practice is actually worth when you come to sell. And foundation two is what, like you said, is what I call systems, not heroes. So in a fragile practice, a manager has a mental model of how everything works. The principal is copied in on everything, and the nurses remember who owes what. And it works until somebody leaves. But in a resilient practice, the boring operational stuff, such as compliance, HR, training, recalls, complaints, equipment servicing, it goes on and on and on. It runs on rails in a resilient practice. It's documented, it's automated where possible, and it doesn't really care who's on holiday. And this is what industrialization looks like. It's not exciting, but it's the difference between a practice that can scale and one that can't. And the shorthand they use with owners, if your manager resigned tomorrow, how long before a new person could run the practice to the same standard? If the answer's 6 months, you don't have any systems in place. You've got tribal knowledge, and that's a risk. And then the third foundation, which is the one most practices underinvest in, is treating the patient relationship as a long-term asset, not a series of transactions. And most practices have got thousands of lapsed patients sat in their database. People who came once, had a really good experience, but they drifted. And a resilient practice has got a systematic way of bringing those people back. And that can be through nurturing inquiries, reactivation of lapsed patient campaigns, following up on treatment plans that were declined. There's a huge amount of unclaimed revenue sat within the lapsed patient list, which I can guarantee every practice in the country has got, everybody will have a lapsed patient list. Not a lot of them will do something about it. So the practices doing this well aren't the ones with the biggest marketing budgets either. They're the ones with the tightest follow-up. So a well-timed message to a lapsed patient's worth more than a Google ad to a stranger every time. You already have tomorrow's patients in your database. The question is, have you got a system that talks to them? And for me, that's a big resilience point within a dental practice. So that's my kind of framework that I would advise owners to work on.
Ooh, fantastic, Andy. And just to sort of revisit those three, without necessarily mentioning the business name, what's the most successful deployment of memberships that you've seen? And how did that business go about making it such a central part of its offering?
So yeah, I mean, membership plans can take multiple forms within a dental practice. And like I said, Joe, membership plans bring patients into the practice more, and they'll accept treatments more as well. But the best run membership plans in practices I've seen offer multiple different types of plan, not one plan for all patients, which is a common mistake that dental practices make. So you can have a hygiene plan. You know, somebody that's had cosmetic work done will want to keep that cosmetic work in pristine condition because they've invested in it. So, composite veneers as an example, once you've had that done, you want to make sure that you're looking after them and that they look their best ongoing for the time that they're gonna remain. But then you've got other people that want the 2 checkups a year and a scale and polish, etc. And you should offer a plan that does that. You should offer plans for elderly families, all different types of plans within there. So when people are looking to make a choice of whether they're going to pay you on a monthly basis or not, they're choosing something that's relevant to them, not something they're being told that they have to have. And for me, that's the biggest difference in plan adoption. It's the off-the-shelf, this is what you must have, versus what is your individual circumstances, and we've got a plan that resonates for you. Does that answer the question?
It does, Andy. I think just to repeat it back to you, it's a very simple persona mapping exercise that starts with you, your business, your patients. You can see most likely from your data the types of treatments that are the most common, and therefore map some packages that meet your patients where they are and give them more of ultimately what they've chosen to take action with, take investment in, and probably want more from you on. And it's a really nice place to start, and your business best, and so create some packages that meet your patients where they are and help you become that more resilient business, as you mentioned earlier. Now on the second point there, the systems not heroes, obviously for a number of years now, you've been a real sort of go-to expert in the implementation of these systems. Where would you recommend a business look to first to really get that core of their business systems and operations, systematized?
I would be remiss if I didn't say Agilio, because we actually operate in the foundations that I'm talking about today, and Agilio was created to deliver these, frameworks that I've been mentioning. The first one is a governance framework, and that's your compliance, your workforce management, the regulatory obligations that you've got to satisfy, and that is a framework in its own right. The operational side is where you start to really look at your business with a different lens, make sure that your rotas are optimized against the PMS booking system, that you're developing your staff through training and professional development. And then you've got a growth tier, a growth framework, which is about that patient engagement. So membership plans, reactivation campaigns, really using the data that you've got within your business, which is probably the most valuable asset that you've got within that practice, and using it so it works for you and unlocks that 6-figure revenue that's probably lost in that lapsed patient alone. And that's not even taking into account patients that are coming in but haven't thought about what additional treatments that they could have, and using marketing campaigns to educate them that will then lead into higher treatment uptake in higher margin treatments that you've got within your practice. So yeah, I would have to say, Gilio, there are other solutions out there. But this one was built with the knowledge of operating a dental practice, and operating a group. So people that want to be ambitious and, have multi-site operations. That's what Agilio was designed for.
And I think you sort of probably took the words out of my mouth with the next question. You quite nicely stepped into that lapsed patient data point, which was the third point of this section that we're working through now. So I guess reflecting all of the information that you just shared there, Andy, where would you start? Like, what's the first of those three that a business can take on to ultimately make their business more resilient?
Yeah, so I mean, the honest answer is it depends where the biggest crack is. That's where I would say. But if I had to pick a default starting point, I'd probably say revenue. Fixing recurring revenue gives you the cash flow and the confidence to then invest in the systems and the patient work. But if you try to do it in the other order, you're going to run out of runway. The other thing I'd say, and I know this will land with some of the audience, you don't have to fix everything at once. People think that they've got to fix the whole thing in one go. You don't. And if you try to do it, you'll probably fail. So what I would say is pick one, do it properly, measure it for 90 days, then move on to the next one. And resilience is built in increments, not in big bang transformations. In history, you don't see resilience as a one-off event. You see it as a series of events that build over time. So yeah, I would say, if I had to pick one, I would say revenue.
That's great. I think, like, just reflecting on where we've been in the conversation so far, we didn't spend a huge amount of time focused on identifying fragility, because I think, business owners know in their hearts of hearts if they need to make things more resilient. But we spent a solid period of time there of, hey, I need to make things more resilient. Where do I start? These are the three sort of chunks I can take on: recurring revenue, systems not heroes, and then really utilizing the value that the business has already generated for itself by building this lapsed patient database. Fast forward to the point, Andy, where those things are implemented, and for many businesses today that you've been working alongside for many years, they are ahead of the curve. They want to stay ahead of the curve. What are the forward-thinking owners that have that resilience in their business thinking about now? Where are they focused?
Yeah, I see four patterns consistently. The best owners I talk to know their numbers. And I don't mean in end of year accounts. I mean, they can tell you what the cost per new patient is in their business, what their plan conversion rate is, their associate chair utilization, their acceptance rate by clinician. So not overall by clinician. They know this stuff because they built the plumbing to be able to see it. That's infrastructure. And the practices that's still running off a monthly P&L and a gut feel about how things are going are flying on instruments that they don't trust. And that was acceptable 10 years ago. But in 2026, with now what's available, I would say that's a choice more than anything else. And there's so much information that's available to practice owners now. There's really no excuse to not know these numbers, but it's a choice of whether you want to or not.
And you mentioned there's a number of patterns here, Andy. I think, like, you were hinting there that it really is a choice now because of the advances that have been made in technology, the advances that have been made in data platforms. I guess, the big one that we all keep hearing about, and it's impossible to ignore, is the impact of AI. And I would love to get your perspective on how AI is providing a positive impact on the operation, and insights and clarity on where the business is at and what it can do from your perspective
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, and there's a lot of noise around AI right now, and you kind of want to tread carefully around it. Um, my honest take is most of the consumer-facing AI dentistry conversations is still hype, but there are two or three places where AI is already meaningfully moving the needle inside dental practices. The first is patient inquiries. So AI-driven chat and response tools that can catch the 60% of website visitors who would otherwise usually slip through the net. And the second for me is admin. So automating recalls, rebooking, consent, documentation. And then the third, which is earlier stage, but it's coming fast, is clinical decision support and imaging. But the pragmatic point that I'll make is you don't need an AI strategy. You need an operating strategy that uses AI where it makes you faster or cheaper or more accurate. And to me, that's a very, very different conversation. So yeah, there's a lot of noise around AI. Do you know, really what you need to do is decide what do you want your business to operate as first and foremost, and then use AI to enhance it rather than thinking that you need an AI strategy in the first place or in isolation. You don't. Um, and then pattern three, moving on for me, is where most practices that I find are still in the Stone Age, and that's in marketing. Marketing in most practices is still a mix of Google ads, a Facebook page, nurse updates, and hope. And then the surprise when new patient numbers are volatile. So the owners who are ahead treat marketing like a pipeline. It's an inquiry in, it's qualified, it's nurtured, it's booked, it's attended, it's converted, it's retained. They know the conversion rate at every step. They know what a new patient costs them, and they know what a new patient value is over 5 years. That's how you make sensible decisions about where to spend. And what happens is when patient volatility presents itself in a practice, most practices will then turn off their marketing because they think they can't control it. And that's probably, the worst decision that you can make. So this incidentally is why we bought Dengro and The Fresh together at Agilio, because the handoff between marketing and front of house was where I found most practices leaked the most value. So that joined up pipeline is now doing heavy lifting for a lot of ambitious owners that can kind of set and forget the patient acquisition strategies. But then once they've got them, know that they've got a conversion tool that can really track that nurture, qualification, booking process to the nth degree. And then the last pattern that I see, and this is the most strategic one, and this isn't the best owners aren't necessarily planning to sell their business, but they are building it as if they might. And that, for me, is where the most strategic element comes into place. They have clean contracts in place. They've got documented processes, separated the owner and the manager roles. They've diversified the revenue, like I said, so it's more spread across the business, so you don't have heroes in there. And they've got a transferable patient base. Because here's the thing, a practice that's built to be sellable is a better practice too. You've got more options, more control, and more value. And then if you do decide to sell, or you do decide to bring in a partner, or even hand it over to a family member, or simply step back, you're ready. Because optionality compounds. So going back to it, my kind of soundbite for this is, build your practice as if you might sell it tomorrow. Run it as if you'll own it forever. That tension is where the best practices live. That was a lot in one segment.
You move through the patterns expertly, Andy, and it all ties together. I think just to pick a couple of sort of points out that really jumped out to me, and I'll start with where you finished there. I think in the preparation for today's session, one of the stories that you shared with me is what acquirers are looking for when purchasing practices has evolved. It's no longer just an EBITDA equation. They're looking for examples of world-class operations like you've just described that can actually be a really positive influence for their existing investments. Not only can they be acquiring a good business that operates in the right way, those operations are going to positively impact where they've made investments previously or the existing group, and therefore there is that additional net benefit. And so that's what acquirers are ultimately looking for. And just to come back up the points ever so slightly, that stat that you shared around things like AI enabled on-site chat that captures 60% of the traffic that would have otherwise got slipped through the net, that makes an enormous difference to that industrialized marketing process. I think when I listen to you talk, Andy, where I draw a parallel in my thinking is, you know, in the digital age, e-commerce, as we all know, has become one of the most, capital, what's the right word? An incredibly conversion focused funnel, right? And it's all
Yes.
marketing, all the way from getting the attention the first time, bringing in the traffic, getting somebody through to checkout, and ultimately buying. And then there's a very similar type of pattern that you're describing here. It's like, don't think of it of marketing and sales. Think of each one of these steps as ultimately you put this much in to acquire the traffic, you put this much in therefore to acquire the lead, you put this much into then ultimately make them a customer, and then you've pushed their lifetime value even further because you continue to engage them and retain them in the right way. And that there is that sort of marketing funnel which is just done extremely well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there are a lot of well-run practices that have implemented what you just touched on, and James. And like I said, they're building their practice as if they could sell it, and they're running it as if they're going to own it forever. And that's a big distinction of motivation within dental practice owners. There's an old Richard Branson analogy that I've used a few times now, and it's not in relation to selling your business, but he says treat people as if they could. Train people so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't want to. And I like that type of analogy. And build your practice as if you might sell it. Run it as if you'll own it forever. They're great ways of saying, invest in people, invest in systems, invest in processes, because it will pay dividends for you.
There's enormous leverage in selling something that you don't need to or want to sell. Something quite powerful in that. Look, we're drawing towards the end of the session, and we really appreciate all the questions that have been coming in whilst Andy has been sharing these insights with us. Before we go, we wanted to launch a poll to you just so we can better understand our audience today, and it can help inform the content that we create in the future. So we're going to bring a poll up on screen now. What is the biggest risk to your practice's long-term growth? Is it recruitment and staffing challenges? Is it inconsistent patient demand, a lack of predictable recurring revenue, or too much reliance on the owner? Just going to give it a few seconds. If you wouldn't mind submitting an answer, that would be greatly appreciated. And while you sort of give us that insight, that was going to help us create more detailed and in-depth content in the future. We've probably got a minute or two for just one or two questions to pose to Andy that have come in today. Andy, I think we sort of addressed this during the session, but there's a slight nuance on this question that takes it a step further. How do I start a membership plan without alienating NHS patients?
Yeah, good question. And you don't have to. So the most successful mixed practices run plans alongside the NHS and not instead of it. The plans for the private side of your business, the patients who want predictability, priority access, and a relationship with the practice that goes beyond 2 checkups a year. So start with a small percentage of your patient base, prove your model, and then scale from there. Don't try and convert everybody overnight, because if you do, it will backfire. So you don't need to alienate, it's to complement, not alienate. And that's what I'd say about implementing plans.
Another question here, Andy, it's not something that we talked to yet in the session, but I think it's front of mind for a lot of practices right now, is what should I expect from the CMA review? Is it going to affect me as a single site owner?
Yeah. And I've been reading a lot about the CMA investigation into the veterinary market, because there's a lot of parallels between what they were looking for in the veterinary space and what they're looking for in the dental space. My honest answer is yes, it will affect you. And it's worth paying attention. I'm going to release content as the CMA investigation develops. And hopefully we can put another webinar or podcast out. But the CMA's focus is on transparency of pricing, clarity of treatment options, and the quality of consent. So if you're already running tight on those things, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you're not, the next 18 months is a very good time to fix it before it's fixed for you. And this is where documented systems pay for themselves 10 times over. Yeah.
That's great. No, thank you, Andy. And look, with one eye on the clock, we said we'd keep it to a tight 30 minutes. I think we're a couple of minutes over. And so I'm going to say my final piece before I hand over to Andy to really sort of see us out today with some closing remarks. Um, this session today has been brought to you by Agilio Dental. And what I'm going to bring up on screen now is just a small offer. If you would be interested in a call with our team of experts from iGrow to talk about getting some of these systems implemented into your business and how you can get more from things like your lapsed patient database, click the button on screen now. A member of the team will be in touch, and we'd love to talk to you and see what help Agilio can offer and provide. But Andy, I'd love to come to you for just some closing remarks and reflection on what we've discussed today.
Yeah, thanks, James. One idea, and that's busy is not the same as resilience. So a full diary is a lovely thing, but it's not a business model. The practices that will thrive over the next decade are the ones that have done the unglamorous work underneath. So that's predictable revenue, systems that don't depend on one person, and a patient relationship that's treated as an asset rather than a series of appointments. And none of that is hard, but it is all deliberate. And the best time to start is when the diary is full and the pressure is off, not when something breaks. And that's the idea that I want to leave today. So thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Look, I know there's some questions that have come in that we haven't been able to get to today. We will come back to you individually. If there's anything more pressing and urgent, please do reach out and one of the team will be happy to help you. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll hope to see you again on the next episode. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.